So thanks everyone for stopping in today. We're going to be reviewing items that you'll need to know for lingering ash training, reporting and identification of these trees for the purpose of EAB resistance breeding through the Forest Service and those partners within the Great Lakes Basin Forest Health Collaborative. My name is Rachel Kappler, and I'll be helping guide you through this training today. My email is there if you have any questions that pop up after you've watched this. And I am the coordinator for the Great Lakes Basin Forest Health Collaborative. The Great Lakes Basin Forest Health Collaborative is something that you'll hear me talk about and abbreviate as GLBFHC. And it's an initial collaboration started between the Forest Service and Holden Forest and Gardens, where I'm located near Cleveland, Ohio. We have funding through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and our primary focus is pest and disease resistance tree breeding. All of the activities that go along with it, not just the specific breeding part, which is why lingering ash training is important for all. Ash trees are one of our main species of concern, as well as American beech and eastern hemlock. We're trying to make sure we can start preservation at home within the Great Lakes region and have a network of partners who are able to participate in activities that they're able to volunteer their time and services for. And this can include not only federal, state, and local agencies, but nonprofits, citizen scientist groups, private landowners, and other individuals, potentially even businesses that would like to address and assist us with our goals. We share resources and tasks and updates with each other, and I'm the primary contact to help keep partners up to date on research and activities, as well as the trainer for partners who are interested in breeding activities, such as what we're doing today, which is monitoring and looking for lingering ash trees, but also everything up to propagation and growing of these trees and any other particular items that go along with that. With our focus on pests and diseases, we have some invasive pests and diseases that are impacting our forest, as we all know. And for this Forest Health Collaborative, being able to assist in a way that will add to what we call integrated pest management plan by having resistance breeding trials happening for these species where we can is important. With ash trees, we have emerald ash borer, and instead of our lovely, beautiful EAB beetle, who's nice and shiny and green, I have a picture here of the level 4 instar larva, which is burrowing underneath the bark of the EAB. Those were extracted. We have beech leaf disease, which is a bit newer and more focused around the Lake Erie region at the moment, and beech bark disease impacting our beech trees, and hemlock woolly adelgid, and also elongated hemlock scale is something that we're looking into for eastern hemlock. To go through our basics for emerald ash borer beetle and ash trees, I'd like to start from the beginning and head into where we are now. For extra information on anything related to EAB, you can go to emeraldashborer.info. That's where I was able to find our map here, which has been updated at the beginning of 2021 on locations where EAB has been detected across the eastern region of North America. That being the primary location where most species of ash trees are residing within the United States, and EAB being a beetle from Asia was found to be transported via shipping container crates into Detroit, Michigan, And so our primary location that it was found was southeast Michigan in the early 2000s, and has spread from that location, with a couple of spots sort of either not being specifically tracked as a clear line from one location to the other. There are a few locations where it has seemingly jumped around. With the beetle being from Asia, it's at the same latitude and able to adapt very quickly to our local environment. It's also specialized on ash trees, and so there are Asian ash trees it has a symbiotic relationship with, where it does not end up killing Asian ash as it does the North American ash tree species. It is going to be feeding primarily on ash leaves, as you see in the picture above, and will be laying its eggs, which is more preferably for it in the crevices of ash tree bark. And those eggs turn into the larvae, which get large, like in the photo there, as they eat away in the cambium layer of the ash tree, and are going to be growing over one summer season, or may overwinter and emerge the next season. The issue here is with the beetle being able to take advantage of our local trees and populate itself at increasingly high numbers. The larvae end up eating away at the important layer of the tree under the bark, where nutrients and water are transferred from one location to the other, therefore essentially girdling the tree and cutting it off from its water and nutrient sources, which is why the trees start to decline. We can see that in the Great Lakes region, we have EAB in all states and provinces, with not the entirety of Ontario and Minnesota yet covered with sightings of EAB. To start at the beginning, though, back in southeast Michigan and Northwest Ohio, excuse the typo there, we have that Detroit area and Toledo area being first impacted heavily by EAB populations. This here is a graph from Wildwood, which is a metro park in the Toledo area of Ohio. And as soon as EAB was known to cause such high impact of damage on ash trees, the Forest Service had set up monitoring plots across Ohio. This is Kathleen Knight from the Forest Service, who had kept track of these plots. And they are plots that are adapted from forest inventory analysis plots. So they're only 22 meters in diameter circles, and are taking account of all the trees that were located there, as well as changes that were associated with the die-off of ash, focusing in on any invasive plants that occurred as well. 2002 to 2008 in the Toledo area was when the high impact primary ash mortality events occurred. You can see here that ash were increasing number of dying ash within those plots. These trees were the mature trees, more than 10 centimeters diameter at breast height, and were rapidly declining over the short number of years, with the amount of EAB beetles being able to increase their population high enough to cause such damage. With that, a lot of people were, of course, very worried, as they should be, for the population of ash trees in natural areas, as well as those that were cultivars planted in city locations. As they were, the Forest Service and Kathleen Knight's crew were looking through their plots across Northwest Ohio and the Toledo area, and it was 2008 where most of their plots had nearly 100% mature ash tree mortality. They were finding these trees larger than 10 centimeters DBH, still one or two outside of their focal plots, and we're worried that was this just sort of a fluke, or were there other mature ash trees that were still surviving even with most of the other ash trees declining or dead? So with that, in the Oak Openings region, the Toledo area of Ohio, from 2010 to 2018, there was a search for these trees, which we call lingering ash trees, because they are towards the end of the ash tree population, the last to die, and potentially resistant to EAB in one way or another. So within that, other locations were asked to scout and search within the Michigan, Ohio area to see if lingering ash trees were happening in their neck of the woods, and to make sure that this wasn't some sort of fluke location. And it was true that other areas were seeing lingering ash trees. And so they were also being asked to report those and to assess what might be different about these trees remaining within these locations. Our trees in the Oak Openings Preserve were tracked and tagged over time to assess which ones were really just the last to die and which were still being healthy and surviving in the long term. The lingering ash were sent to samples to the Forest Service to start grafting them into having little clones of them available for research. But in the landscape, you can see that in the first picture, we have a lot of downed ash and a lot of open canopy gaps that allowed other invasive and native plants to start growing in those locations. And this picture on the left with the deer hidden in the grass, we have canary reedgrass coming into this location, which is more of a wet floodplain. In other locations, you've seen more maple and tree seedlings starting to occur and grow more rapidly. In the center picture, we have many of the seedlings on the ground, ash tree seedlings, as well as maple. And on the right, we have a picture of one of our lingering ash trees. Most of these trees within the primary location that we started in the Toledo area were green ash trees, some of them white. And so that's where the research headed off into that location. In order to assess the trees and make sure that we're looking at something more specific occurring and that these trees are not having any sort of help in some sort of way, whether it's from us or from their natural environment, we make sure that the areas had been hit by EAB and that most of the other trees of ash trees had mortality events occurred within the area, and that this tree is still surviving, even though at least 2 years ago, more than 95% of the other ash trees had died. Now we've had to adjust that a little bit as EAB has spread across the nation, and we see that it reacts a little bit differently in other locations due to forest differences. And so if it's been at least, if the tree has been healthy at least 4 years and there's only 50% ash tree mortality within the forest that it's located in, those are also considered lingering ash trees. We see that in our Michigan, Ohio locations, when it first attacked, we had just a very heavy abundance of green ash and white ash populations that were located in such a way that it was very easy for EAB to increase their population super quickly. Whereas in other locations, such as Pennsylvania, where we have upland woods with white ash, they're more spread out and it takes a little bit longer for EAB to cause the same kind of havoc. All of these trees that we have taken samples of for the Forest Service are located in natural woodland areas to make sure that they're not a ash tree cultivar planted in an urban location, as all of those cultivars have already been taken and had research done on. This has been happening for the past 20 years. So we're not interested in being looking at any cultivars for the lingering ash research and breeding. So we want them from natural areas and large enough to be preferred by EAB during your location's peak infestation. So the trunk size is what I mean by large enough. And so they needed to be that 10 centimeter DBH when you had your primary EAB attack first happening within your location, as well as it continuing to have a somewhat healthy canopy. We're looking for a healthy canopy of full leaves between June and August, September, depending on how quickly fall kind of sets in every year with leaf drop. And as time goes on, if it's a little bit past those 2 years since you've had mature ash mortality, these lingering ash trees could also start to have a little bit of a slower decline, and you might start to see a little bit of canopy loss and root suckers. But the way that the propagates end up undergoing research with the forest surface is through clone resistance testing. And so, like I said, samples, branches from these trees are taken for grafting onto other ash trees that are potted. And so that ends up creating potted ash trees that are basically clones of the trees found in the lingering ash tree found in nature. The most direct way to see what happens to these trees and what kind of tolerance or resistance they have to EAB is by placing an EAB egg on them. And so multiple eggs are placed along the trunk of the propagate as soon as it is tall enough in order to have this testing done on it. They're allowed to grow for the summer season, and at the end, we have to do destructive processing in order to assess what happened to the EAB larva. There's a first a check sort of after a couple of weeks to see if it successfully exited the egg, and then peeling of the bark where the location, starting at the location where the larva had entered the tree, to see if it had grown to its full size. So each larva that is on the tree that ends up being growing to that largest stage showed there in the center picture circle is qualified as a little bit non-resistant, and then those that have a resistance reaction will show something such as this. So we have a dark line within that blue circle, and that's showing the location where the cells had hardened around the larva and stopped it from eating any more of itself and had killed the larva. This can show up in different varieties. It doesn't necessarily have to be straight up darkening around the larva. It can also impact the entire section of the tree. And it can also not kill the larva completely, but decrease its size and weight relative to what the very susceptible trees would have shown for those. With our EAB bioassay, which is what we call this testing that we do where the EAB is placed on the tree, you have that varying in the impact on the larva. The trees don't all react the same way to the EABs as expected, and we put enough EAB eggs on them to have significant pressure on each individual tree, as you can see, with the many little white spots that are on that tree in the picture. Some of the individuals kill significantly more larvae than a susceptible control green ash, and that can be just as much as an Asian ash or a Manchurian ash tree would be able to kill. Some of the trees will kill more larvae than the control, but it's not significant, and some do not kill any larvae at all and end up getting eaten up completely. So our lingering ash trees have a variation in just how resistant they are to EAB. It's not 0 or 100. There's variation in between those. With that, we have lingering ash tree parents being grown in the greenhouses and hand pollinated together. Their offspring have been grown up like this in pots and put through this test. And some of them do end up performing better than the two parents did themselves. And so this is the key piece here on how we end up being able to breed for resistance to EAB in our tree breeding selections after putting them through these tests. The ash breeding program that the Forest Service had started and continues to work on then has all of these lingering ash trees that have been tested for how resistant they are to EAB, grown and to maturity, and then hand pollinated for many different crosses and creating many different families. We have our first generation, like I said, having a few of them being the best in their ability to react to EAB eggs placed on them. And those are then chosen to create a second generation of trees being hand pollinated, grown, and then planted into what we call either a field test, because we are planting them in a plantation style to allow us to assess them over time out in nature instead of the greenhouse. And those that end up making it to maturity are then allowed to do open wind pollination. And this plantation then can be a seed orchard that will allow us to have seeds with increased defense against EAB, but it also allows us to retain genetic diversity within the system. So we have multiple different ways that an ash tree can fight against EAB, and directly with its fight against the larva is just one of those things. And so other information will need to be retained genetically to keep them adaptable to future environmental issues. There's a reproduction, slight reproduction issue between different types of ash trees. So white ash and green ash trees have male flower and female flower trees. So one tree will have just female flowers and one tree will just have male flowers. The first picture on the left here are male flowers. You can see the yellow pollen on them. Those are almost spent. And then in the center, with the palm of my hand, that is how the female flowers look. We have very small, dark petals there, and each of those locations end up being a location where a seed is formed, as you can see in the other picture. With that being the case, genetically, we end up needing a few more of these two ash species than the other, because we need both male and female individuals, whereas for black ash and blue ash, we would just need the one individual would be able to have both types of flowers located on them. So it becomes a situation where male and female flowers need to be taken into account when we're looking at what we have for putting them into our seed orchards. With that background on how things have occurred in the past with lingering ash and how we've worked, the Forest Service has worked on them to get them to a state where we can assess them and use them for tree breeding, I just want to touch base a moment and switch gears to talk about ash trees on your land and give you some information that might help with your decision on what to do with them, whether you're in a location where you're in varying stages of EAB impact. This kind of decision tree can help with understanding what you might want to do, whether it's a private home where you have ash on your land or a public area. These are things to consider. With EAB being an issue that ends up likely causing mortality in trees, cutting a tree down is something that is important to take into account when it can turn into a potential hazard. So an area where it could die and end up falling over on property, people, roads, etc., is important to assess what you would do with that tree, whether it's in the process of being attacked by EAB or is just a small tree but will end up growing into an adult tree. If it's on the fence line, you might not want it growing there. You might want to cut it. If it's in an area where it can fall and it cause harm, cutting is necessary to maintain that safety. Treating a tree is something that can be done in two different ways. The best way is by professional arborists who come in with pesticide, but treating is going to be for trees that have a specific special role in the landscape, and you are going to be able to treat that tree practically because it's not a one and done situation. It's a every or every other year treatment situation. And so in the long term, that has to be kept into account of. And if it's a special tree on a certain property, personal property, treating is something that can be done. You have the best way that they've been doing this is with injectable pesticides. So we have injection sites at the bottom at the base of the tree, and it ended up looking at slowly injecting the pesticide within the tree at different times of the year. The other more general application is soil drenching, which is basically being able to take the pesticide items that you get at your do-it-yourself location stores. And that is one where it is a little bit more tricky. And you definitely want to make sure you are a little bit more knowledgeable on how those are applied before doing so, because it can cause issues with the local area. So applying a soil drench too quickly or in the wrong area may cause those pesticides to be uptook by either other nearby plants instead of your tree, or might have it end up flowing into the waterways instead of into your tree. So there's some precaution there for those kinds of items, but they are available if there's a specific special tree that needs to be treated. And then finally, if you have a tree that, if it dies and falls, won't cause any harm to anyone or anyone's property, then it doesn't need to be cut, and it doesn't even need to be treated. Being able to have it available and in the natural environment and have these natural processes take place is important, and is also a location where we are monitoring and using the mortality events that do occur to help us choose lingering ash trees for the tree breeding program. So this kind of location is more your natural forest areas, but it doesn't have to be a large forest. It could be someone's small private forest if you have trees growing within those locations. It's not necessary to remove them, even if they do end up all dying. The dead trees do still have a role within the ecosystem for bats, birds, and insects other than EAB. Some specific information on dead or dying trees. So for yard trees, just as an FYI, people will tell me that they have a lingering ash tree, but it's a yard tree. Some nursery stock cultivars that may be planted nearby your yard location, and maybe some of their seeds have grown within your yard. They have a partial tolerance to EAB, especially if EAB is at a low infestation rate. And so they'll survive, they'll have symptoms, but they may also still be nursery stock and unable for us to use for a lingering ash breeding program. And it is always variable as when an unhealthy ash will have its last years. So with lots of different variations occurring based on its location and environmental factors that impact it. There have been some research into injecting pesticides into forest trees. That work has been done by Kathleen Knight and others at the Forest Service. This needs a little bit more work in other locations to understand it and know that it works similarly in different types of forests. So this information is coming out, and we're looking forward to hearing more about it in the future. And like I said, forest trees are going to be decomposing over time on your land. Standing dead ash provide bird nesting habitat, bark foraging, bird food, and will definitely just be a location within your forest that you'll have to take precautions when visiting or being around. And of course, this is where we can monitor over time for lingering ash to be reported. Young ash, whether it's young ash growing new seedlings and saplings within your yard or within the forest, just take note that these trees can survive shade, but will start to be able to grow even better the more sun that they have. And so they can end up growing faster in full sunlight, especially if it's in a yard and it has fewer plant competitors around it. And this can sometimes lead us to have, especially in the forest where canopy gap has occurred, where people report a lingering ash tree, and we end up maybe needing to take a tree core to understand just how old that tree is, because sometimes they're the next generation that was just suppressed by the mature trees and are now increasing their size quickly due to sunlight availability. In locations such as Michigan and Ohio, after that primary EAB mortality event on the ash, the EAB abundance is dropped, but it varies by location, and they tend to still be present in very low numbers. Trapping continues to occur, and there may be a population that winks out, but as soon as the younger ash trees can be only 6 or 7 feet tall, they could potentially be targeted by EAB again. But with genetic environmental variation occurring between generations, it means that new trees may not react the same way as their parents, especially because EAB populations have had this fluctuation. So the longer your location has had EAB, the more likely you're going to see different reactions happening in different locations based on the amount of new and old ash within your location. But overall, you still want to think of those young ash and where they're located at and how they will be if they get tall and large, if EAB populations are low, and decide on if they might be a future fall hazard. They might need to be removed. If they're within your yard and you want to give it a go to have a shade tree within your private property, keeping them and treating them is also an option. But of course, keeping them and not treating them is totally okay as well. They don't have to be removed. They can go through this process of having EAB continue to attack them. We expect that this is going to be a long-term pest that we need to deal with. Forest ash can be monitored, these very young trees over the years to assess what is going to happen with this next generation and can possibly be used for future lingering ash tree selection. Also, ash in forests that are growing can also have other integrated pest management activities added to them, such as biocontrol insects when they are large enough and have the potential to be housing enough EAB larvae for biocontrol insects. So just a quick side note and segue on that. We do have biocontrols, which are, in this case, insects called parasitic wasps. Everybody kind of gets a little nervous when I say wasps, but you can see here that these are adult parasitic wasps in a see-through cup. They do no harm to humans. They are from Asia. We have 3 different species that we found from Asia that specialize on EAB larvae, and they are predators to the EAB eggs or the larva. Their offspring will specifically eat the eggs or the larva in order to grow into adult parasitic wasps. To learn a little bit more about this, if you're interested in understanding what kind of locations have had these insects released, or what kind of qualifications a location needs to have in order for them to be released, you can go to mapbiocontrol.org. This is run by USDA or government APHIS location within Michigan. There are not very many locations that produce these parasitic wasps, and so they're highly quarantined and only released in locations that have been approved by APHIS. And finally, when we have our canopy gaps letting light in and the new seedlings are growing because they have more light, this also means that other plants have more light and can take advantage of it as well. So make sure that you're monitoring your locations for invasive plants to help keep your woods healthy. And when worrying about what's happening to ash in your woodlands, make sure you think about your overall woodland health to understand if losing ash is going to be a major problem or a minor problem, depending on the makeup of your woodland. So for today, I want to make sure we're all on the same page and being able to identify ash species, just in case we need to, just in case there are individuals who are uncertain. And so Fraxinus is our genus for ash. There are multiple ash species that are along the eastern half of the United States. Here on the left, we have a picture of mature ash tree bark. Grayish, has crevices. These crevices are what the EAB like to find and lay their eggs in. They can lay their eggs on the trunk, but they usually do start up in the branches and work their way down. With Fraxinus, we have opposite growth occurring. So that means that on their leaves and on their branchlets and branches, when there is with the center stalk, we have branches coming off of each side of that stalk so that we have a very symmetrical look to it. You can see here, unfortunately, the canopy of this tree is dead, but it does give us a good look in the center picture of how we have opposite growth occurring with all of the branches and branchlets, forming a little bit of a Y-shape occurrence across the board. This also happens with their leaves. So on the right, we have a picture of one leaf. One leaf has multiple leaflets, and all the leaflets except for the terminal leaf on the end are opposite to each other. With the different types of ash trees, we usually have 5 to 9 leaflets per tree. This one here is a white ash leaf, and you can get it confused with other trees. Most notably is usually walnut. Walnut has many more leaflets than this. And the seeds are, of course, going to be different between walnut and ash. Although some trees like box elder is a type of maple. Maple seeds kind of look like ash seeds, except ash seeds do not do a little helicopter whirl when they fall. They are more cigar and linear in shape, with a very oblong cigar-shaped seed on the inside, especially for our pumpkin ash, our green ash, and our white ash. We have a little bit more of a flattened look for blue ash trees and black ash tree seeds. And those right here in this picture are harvested and dried. So towards the end of summer into fall is when they start to get this tan dried look. And during the growing season, they're going to be a light green, yellowish color beforehand. The ruler on the side there is centimeters. And pumpkin ash and green ash are 2 species that have quite similar seeds. And so that's why they're grouped together there as well. There are other ways that you can distinguish what kind of species of ash you're looking at, especially making sure that it's not a different kind of tree. With the most familiar one that we've been working with in the Michigan, Ohio area being white ash and green ash. We have them pictured there on the left. With a leaf and them falling each year, as it falls off, it leaves a leaf scar underneath the bud, which is our brown circular item you see in the picture. The buds are going to be just above the leaf scar, and with white ash, you end up having the bud being more surrounded by the leaf scar. So the shape to some people ends up looking like a smile with a big old nose on top, or a banana shape. This picture with white and green ash is where the leaves have just been removed, so it's nice and fresh. Whereas the pumpkin ash in the center is one from last year where the leaf fell off naturally, and so it's dried over and brown. Either way, it's going to retain that shape. Green ash is going to have a little bit more of a D-shaped on its side kind of look, a little bit similar to the D-shaped exit holes of EAB. With the bud sitting on top more flatly than into where the leaf scar is. Pumpkin ash also has that D or shield shape, but it's a little bit larger and a little bit more prominent on the tree, although it can be confused with green ash. Not a big deal on our part. We take a look at that as well when we inspect our lingering ash tree reports. And then we have black ash, which is going to be a rounder shape and is going to have your leaf scar a little bit more circular, and of course named such because the buds there are not so brown, but a lot more black or dark brown. With blue ash, I usually don't have people worry about the ash leaf scar. The key identifier for blue ash is that their twigs have a square shape to them. They are going to have, when you feel the twigs, not a smooth, but edges to them. Apparently, I have lost a little bit of control of my remote there. Excuse me for a second here. We have a picture now of our black ash tree versus other species of ash because their leaves look a little bit more different and prominent, and it helps us with looking at differentiations between them. And in this case, the picture on the left is black. The leaflets are going to form right up against the center stem there. It's a picture on the back side of the leaf so that you can see just how closely it forms to the center stem. Whereas, of course, any of the other ash tree species are going to have their leaflets forming a little bit away from the stem and having their own petiole stem attached to the center stem of the leaf. One more thing before we head into the specifics of how we report the lingering ash trees. There's also a disease called ash yellows, and it ends up giving the tree symptoms that are similar to EAB infestation, which is overall thinning of the canopy, not as many leaves on the canopy as it should in a healthy tree, and thinning even more over time. And trunk or branch shoots will occur off of the base of the tree. Some people call them root suckers. And those shoots can also form anywhere along the trunk or branches. And that's a symptom where the tree is trying to produce more leaves to get more energy, but has a hard time due to it being attacked. Ash yellows distinct symptoms that will allow you to know for sure, hopefully, that it is ash yellows and not EAB. Of course, you won't have any other EAB symptoms like exit holes from EAB, but the leaves will have yellow patches on them, or they will start to go light green and yellow. The leaf growth will be stunted. They'll be smaller than healthy trees, and the leaves will even turn a complete light green or yellow within summer. But also note that summer drought and such can cause leaves to do this and start their early transformation into fall foliage. So once again, when we're looking for lingering ash in the woodlands, we need to keep these things in mind. Having an area where most of the ash trees have had mortality happen to them by EAB within, and this tree has been living even longer, for at least 2 years longer than the others that have died, or 4 years longer if not all of the ash trees have died from EAB in your location. We're looking at natural woodland areas, and we're looking at trees that are large enough that they would be preferred by EAB when EAB infestation occurs. That is, as I said previously, we're looking at trees that are at least 10 centimeters diameter at breast height, and we'll get into what that means in a minute. And of course, having a healthy canopy over the growing season. A healthy canopy for ash tree has been categorized so that you don't have to give me a certain percentage of leaves that are still on the tree. It's going to be in a rating of 1 to 5, where if it has 100% of its leaves, the canopy is full and healthy, that's a 1. And if the canopy has no leaves in the canopy, then it's a 5. 5 doesn't necessarily mean that the tree is completely dead. There may still be epicormic sprouts or those trunk shoots or root shoots that are coming up. And in between, we have our sort of different percentages. So if it has less than 50% of its canopy left, then it's a 4. If it has more than 50% of its canopy present and alive, then it's a 3. And if it's only missing a few leaves, it's thinning, but there's no top dead, whole branches dead, then it's a 2. We usually like to have lingering ash trees reported when they're a 1 or a 2. And if we have a backup in our system and are unable to get to it right away, we should still have a few years before it ends up turning into a 3. Some pictures to go along with those categories. So again, the canopy is going to have full leaf out during the summer. 2 and 3, there's a slight differentiation there. And we only start to see the very grand impact on the canopy when we're looking at a 4. The 3 here is going to have at least, again, 50% of its canopy area have leaves still growing during the summer. Anything less than that, and it's a 4. So you heard me say diameter at breast height. Many foresters already know what this means. And with centimeters, 10 centimeters, there is going to be 4 inches. And when we're measuring a tree, we're with it diameter at breast height is not based on the person, but based on the height from the ground. So 4.5 feet from the base of the tree is where you're going to want to measure it. And that's going to fall differently on different people. So make sure that on yourself, you know where 4.5 feet is so that you can measure trees properly out in the forest. Diameter, of course, is just your circumference divided by pi, or 3.14. So you could just take out a regular measuring tape that may be used for fabric and use that to measure your tree. You don't have to necessarily buy or purchase a forester's tape that measures trees. Your 25-inch circumference would give us a rather large lingering ash tree of 8-inch DBH. And you'll notice that when we talk about our TreeSnap app, it will also let you just enter the circumference. You don't have to do that math to know what the diameter is. For reporting potentially resistant trees or lingering ash trees, you can email me directly. My email there, I'm here to receive information and sightings of them. I can give you a paper report that you can fill out and return to me with some pictures of that tree or those trees so that we can assess the situation. But one way that's been quite useful in getting many people able to report trees at once is use of cell phone apps. And we're using the TreeSnap app. This one, as you can see in the picture, this is the main opening page after you log into that app. It has many different tree species that you can report individual trees for. And each of these trees are undergoing some sort of research and are needing to have reports of them in the field. And being able to go and look for these specific types of lingering ash trees and report them directly through the app helps us with assessing them quicker. This kind of information via the app is available to just those what we call app managers, and those are people involved with projects on each of these trees. So for example, I'm able to log in and look at anybody's reporting of an ash tree and search through them to see which ones are the best lingering ash trees to go and visit. So I wanted to give everybody a minute if they don't have TreeSnap on their phone and they want to download it now to take a look at it. I'm going to go specifically through step by step how you would enter a tree into the app. And so I'll give us about 4 minutes here. And if there are any questions, go ahead and turn your microphone on or write it down in the chat. Okay. So hopefully, depending on your phone's access to go to its app store to download the app, you'll have varying amounts of time to get through that. But what you'll see when you are able to get into it, they will ask you for an email so that you can set up an account. And that information is private. If at any point I send a message to anybody who's sent in a report via TreeSnap, it only goes to them as a TreeSnap notification. So our first screen that you see once you're able to log in will have all of these different trees. You click on ash and you get this middle screen here where we have add entry already chosen so that you can start adding information on the tree that you've located and is a lingering ash to be added to the system. If at any time you're confused as to what you should be looking for, there are different locations within the app that will allow you to take a look at it. So you'll have the ability to click from add entry over to the next section, which is information. And that will allow you to take a look at the background information on why we're doing this, and other examples. It'll also give you little places to click on examples when you select one of these things. So images at the beginning will ask you if it can use your phone's camera, and you allow it to do that. You can, what we ask is that you take pictures of what you can find for EAB symptoms, the canopy as a whole, if possible, and a close-up on the leaves or those leaf scars so that we can ascertain the species is correct. When you hit on species, it'll bring up what you see on the very far right of the screen. And of course, feel free to click along in your phone while I'm talking about this. In fact, you guys might already be through all of them already, but I'm just going to go slow here for people who need that. Now, of course, since this is available for everyone to use, a free app, any citizen science person who's interested in this can use it. So we have a show examples button under what species of ash tree is this. You can click on one of those, or you can click on uncertain. And as long as you take some detailed pictures, it will help us ascertain that you did find an ash tree and what species of ash tree that is. Next, we have habitat. And so on the left side of the screen here, how would you characterize the habitat where the tree is located? With this one, you can basically click all of them, but you want to click just the ones that are important to where you're at. And in some cases, because we have roadside, urban, suburban, or park all mushed together, think of this more as a park that would be an inner city park rather than a forested park that you can visit. So if you're in a nature preserve, a metro park that has a large forest stand, state lands, a state park, but it's a pretty, sizable forest, you can just click forest. Then we ask if you see seeds present on the tree. We saw a picture of that earlier. Of course, that's only with green and white ash going to be present on the female trees with female flowers. And if you forget what the seeds look like, you can say, I'm not sure. In some cases, you might not have binoculars and you need them to see the seeds. So that's fine as well. It'll also ask you if you've seen flowers. And so that's also the same thing, a yes, no, or I'm not sure. Flowers, of course, are only going to be present in early to late spring. If you see any of these signs of emerald ash borer, check all that apply. And then this will also give you example pictures to look at so that you don't have to worry about, oh, what did Rachel tell us in this presentation I watched? So we have our D-shaped adult exit holes. That's where our larva, after turning into a beetle, will chew out from the inside out through the bark and leave a D-shaped hole. Bark coming off with tunneling underneath. I'll show you a picture of that. The tunneling is where the larva was eating. Bark splitting. Bark splitting is usually a vertical split in the trunk of the tree. Emerald ash borer beetles are larvae. Actually viewing them is pretty difficult unless you peel some bark off of the tree or you're lucky enough to see one exiting its exit hole. That's the only time in my 10 years of working on this that I've seen an emerald ash borer beetle alive and not on a trap, a sticky trap. And of course, stump sprouting or epicormic growth. Again, epicormic growth, it just means those sprouts are coming off, new leaves and branches are forming directly off of the trunk in random locations and directly off of a branch and not in that opposite way that it usually does. And of course, woodpecker feeding holes. We associate that with a high abundance of EAB present because the woodpeckers are very good at locating the larva underneath the bark for feeding. This is some of the pictures that you can see when you hit show example within the app. You have your D-shaped hole, you have the tunneling underneath the bark, you have your epicormic growth happening along the trunk of the tree. Just a FYI, so like it says, you can say that you've seen the EAB or the larva. There are many EAB lookalikes, and most of the time emerald ash borer are in the canopy leaves eating, and can be difficult to see unless they're actually exiting out of the tree where you can view them. Some similar ones of size and shape are other borer beetles, and of course they're going to have be a little bit smaller in North America and darker and not as vibrant. Most often I've heard people thinking that they've seen one on the ground, and usually that's going to be the beetles that are ground beetles. So we have a green ground beetle, a shiny green ground beetle, and a 6-spotted shiny tiger beetle. Those ones have very tiny yellow spots on the side of their back, so it's hard to tell if it has spots or not. And then you have your normal larger beetles, like your Japanese beetle, if you're familiar with those. Those are much fatter, wider than the emerald ash borer beetle. Tree bark splitting and tunneling. So here we have a couple other pictures. In the center area here, we have a dying tree that the bark had peeled off. You can see the larval tunneling underneath, and some of those holes within the bark that is remaining are woodpecker holes. Woodpecker holes are at least an eraser size hole or larger, maybe double that size, maybe the size of one of those big pink erasers. They kind of dig in there and make a big hole mess to get the larva as best they can. And then on the right, we have pictures of the trunk and what we call bark splitting. So you can see we have smooth bark, and then we have bark with, some people call it cracking. This splitting here is a symptom of them trying to remedy the larva underneath the bark. And in some cases, if they're successful, that crack will start to heal. And so it'll still have a line in it, but it will be a little healed over. We have gone all the way through half of what you need to be putting down for this, and the other half is trees nearby. What we're looking for here is to know that this location has had ash trees that are in a large enough grouping that EAB would likely be there. And it gives us an idea, no matter where you're located, what state of EAB infestation you're at. So you can check all that apply. And if you're just at the very beginning of EAB impact in your local area, you might still have healthy large and healthy small trees around. If you like here in Northern Ohio, where it's been 10 years since we've had our very big EAB outbreak, you can have dead and dying still around. You can have healthy and small trees still around. And you might even classify some of these next generation trees as healthy and large as well. Or you might have an isolated individual, and so no tree species, no other ash tree species are around. So in trees nearby, you're just focusing on what other ash trees are nearby. And this is just visually as far as your eye can see. You don't need to worry about how large of an area, just right where you can see and where your tree is located at. And then that canopy rating, what's the health of the tree's canopy? That's that 1 through 5 rating that we've already went over. And then we have our tree diameter. And you can see in the picture on the right, you enter the diameter. It can be measured or estimated. So say you know you have a good idea that like your thumb is 2 inches long. So that could help you estimate the diameter of the tree. But please say that you estimated it. Then you can choose inches or centimeters, depending on what you've used. And if you've only done the circumference with a rope or a measuring tape, then you click the Compute from Circumference button at the bottom before hitting Confirm. The other items that you can put into this app are tree identifiers, basically tree ID, which usually ends up going along with a tree tag. So if this tree tag has a tag on it, then please write it down there. And comments can be added if you have any other symptoms or odd things happening with this tree that you need to explain a little bit more than just by answering these questions. Now, if you are on your private land and you are just keeping track of this for your own sake, you can go to advanced options and save privately so that anybody who's a manager of the app will not see the tree and its location or information. So say you have other trees coming up on your property, new ash trees, and you don't think they're lingering ash trees, but you just want to keep track of them for your own information over time, you can go to advanced options and save privately. You're going to have the location show up there at the bottom. That's because you've allowed the app to use your location. That's necessary for us to be able to identify where the tree is located at and visit it if we choose to use it for a sample. And of course, don't forget to hit save at the bottom. When you hit save, it will ask you if you have any, if you want to upload your pictures now. It usually will do that right away if you're already connected to Wi-Fi or something like that. But if you're out in a remote location and have no signal, you can still save it and upload the pictures and information later. All right, so that's the end of my TreeSnap walkthrough. Are there any questions as you go through that? Let me take a look in the chat here. Likely not. We've tried to make this very easy and very accessible to everyone. And so if, as I said, TreeSnap is one that we're using for locations that are likely to have lingering ash trees. If your location is just starting to have EAB impact your area, another way that you can find lingering ash trees is to is a bit of a monitoring and waiting assessment that I'll go through next. And again, don't forget that you could use TreeSnap for other tree species as well. So it does come in handy for that. So an alternate ash survey project that started in New York when they were first having an inkling that EAB was heading their way is something called an app project on an app called Anecdata. If you've heard of this before, great. If not, this is one of those apps that are free to download. And once you sign in and have your account, you have to choose a project to add to your itinerary to add information in. So it's a little bit more complicated to get started in some cases. All the information that I'm going over today with Anecdata has been developed by the Ecological Research Institute in New York. And they have a website, monitoringash.org, that they've formulated to go over all this information as well. They call this the Managing and Monitoring Ash Projects, hyphenated as MAMA. And so MAMA Monitoring Plots Network is basically the title of the project in the Anecdata app. And in this case, what you're able to do is set up a monitoring plot with just taking down data on only the ash trees within that area so that you can know how many of them are alive, how many of them are dead, how many are dying from EAB. And being able to have people interested in taking down this data for multiple years allows a location to know, well, now it's time to start looking for lingering ash because it's been 2 years since almost all of the ash trees have died. or it's been 4 years since at least half of the ash trees have died in this plot. And so it's helpful to do these monitoring plots as you are being impacted by EAB the first time around. But in places such as my location in Cleveland and Toledo and Detroit areas, we're past that and starting to see new generation of ash trees growing up. And so in those locations, it would be more of keeping track of the next generation of ash trees and assessing how long it will take EAB to impact them. So you might, in those locations, be tracking ash trees, but not necessarily being able to be close to a year where you would be identifying lingering ash trees. To give you an idea of how the monitoring plots work, they ask that we have a location where there's at least 40 or more ash. Usually, we have ash trees in our locations where some are alive, some are dying, some are dead. All of those are counted into this 40 number. And we hope that the group that starts these monitoring plots will have multiple years of interest in being able to go back and revisit these trees. The plot area that you set up for these projects need to be at least a half an acre, but they can be up to 10 acres. And the ash trees within the plot area do not have to be contiguous, meaning that they don't have to all be growing right next to each other. As shown in the picture here, say you have a big rectangle plot and it's 2 or 3 acres, and you have 3 different spots within those 3 acres that have ash trees. That whole area can be considered a plot, and all of those trees can be counted and when you're counting up to trying to have 40 trees within a plot. We want to have these done in locations where natural ash mortality is unknown, and we need to assess just how bad it is. And that, of course, helps us with meeting the criteria in a location where we know it's time to start looking for lingering ash trees. Here is a screenshot of what the Anecdata website looks like. You can go on there and just search for the project name. The project, again, is Mama Monitoring Plots Network. And if you're adding a new observation, you are going to be needing to have a login for that as well. This is something where if you go to the monitoringash.org webpage, you can end up downloading a monitoring plot data sheet, and you wouldn't necessarily have to input all of this information into the phone. So for example, we have a TreeSnap web page as well, where you can look at your observations, but you have to add them in via the phone. And then we have our monitoringash.org webpage that ERI has set up. And here you get an overview of everything. If we're going to mortality monitoring, you're able to go down, learn about it. And at the very bottom, we have data sheets that you can download to use so that you can look at it on paper while you're out in the woods and not have to worry if it's just more comfortable to write it down on paper than in the phone. So with this, we have a couple of things that we'll go through on the app, same as the sheet here. And if you fill it out on the paper sheet, you can fill it out online. You don't have to input it into your phone to get this data in there. Who you are, what the date is, your location, your location's name. What you'll need for this is to be able to identify each tree within the plot. So you'll need to have a tree tag. It can be possible that your trees are spaced out well enough that your lat and your long will give you its location, and the tree tag physically on the tree might not be necessary, but with the variation that you get from GPS lat longs based on satellite data, and you definitely want to be able to have some sort of identifier on the tree with that, so that if your GPS takes a spot and it's just ends up, you go back to that spot, but the tree is not exactly in that location, it's somewhere nearby, you'll be able to pick it up because you have a tag on it. And there are different kinds of tags that you can get for a tree. Just remember, if you're nailing something into the tree, you should use aluminum nails so that if it ends up being cut down with a chainsaw, the chainsaw will easily be able to go through that and not cause any damage to the person using the chainsaw. Okay, enough on that rant there. Let me head through the anecdata monitoring in order for you to see what that looks like on the phone app. Before I go through it completely, is there any confusion on how I described what the plot is? Is there any questions about that I could answer before we head through it? It might give people a chance to go ahead and download that app as well. I'll give them a minute for that. As you can see, you're still going to have a similar beginning to this app where it will give you information about the project. And when you're doing a new observation, that's going to be a new plot. You choose the data sheet that you're going to need. So year one, your initial year that you start, is going to be different from afterwards. So they give you that before you end up going to the section of your phone, that picture on the left, where you have to link it up to choose the location at the top, make sure that's correct. The date and time should automatically go in there, and then year one monitoring plot information will be written down there for you to read so that you don't forget any of the important things, like we're looking for at least 40 trees, 40 ash trees within these certain sized areas that are at least 4 inches diameter at breast height. So we're looking just for the mature trees, not for the seedlings and saplings. And they give you some extra tips in there to make sure that you're able to complete the plot. The next things that you start writing down in the app. So the screen on the left here has writing in the surveyor's name. You can write in your institution that you're working with, whether it's your employer or the people you're volunteering for, or the location's name. Say you're just at the park, the name of the park could be put there, as well as in the location name. So each location will have its plot name. And so that's what we have here. If we have a certain location within a park, the plot name can be more specific. You don't just have to say Hudson Park, you can say Pine Meadow Trail, and that's where you start the plot because that's where the ash trees are. We end up in the center picture having the habitat type checked. Again, you can check multiple if within this plot you have multiple habitats. Upland, wetland, and floodplain. So upland forest basically is what that's referring to. Wetland, meaning that you have our soggy, moist soil and fewer trees. There are trees that are adaptable to wetlands and floodplain areas, and we do find that black and green ash are more likely to occur there. So floodplain is just meaning an area around a water body that is low in elevation and will get flooded during the spring. As a note, be careful when you're out monitoring these different habitat types. Make sure you're aware of where any dead trees are, not just ash trees, and whether or not there is going to be any mucky floodplain soil that ends up getting you stuck up to your knees and unable to remove yourself. So always go out with a partner and always be aware of your surroundings. Now, when you actually get into the tree data, you'll select what DBH unit you're using, centimeters or inches. And then for each tree, you have a count number to keep track of how many ash trees you visited, and then a tree tag number, because a tree tag number could be anything. And so you end up then giving your tree two different numbers. The tree tag number that you'll visibly see on it, and then the count number so that you know you've visited 40 trees. You only need to place tags on living trees. If you come across a dead tree, you'll enter that information. You'll have the GPS location for that tree, but because it's dead, it doesn't take tags very well. And once it's dead, it could likely fall over, blocking the tag. And if it's in a floodplain, it's even likely that it will be, once fallen over, picked up and moved by the water. Ash species, per usual, put that in for each individual tree. You may have a location where you have more than one ash species. Don't assume that if you found one green ash, that all of the trees in that location are green ash. And then Canopy health class is the same as what we did with our 1 through 5 numbers on our TreeSnap report. Canopy health class at the top here on the left side. And then down here, we have definite EAB signs. We have a couple of different, one different thing here that is not mentioned in TreeSnap, and that's flaking. So what ends up happening when woodpeckers are looking for things to eat is they will do outer bark removal. And so you'll have a smooth bark again with no grooves in it, because the woodpecker has removed them, and that ends up making the bark a lighter color, and it gets exposed to more of a inner blonde shade on the bark. DBH is also entered there, and if your tree has multiple trunks, you only measure the DBH of the largest trunk. And this is an occurrence that does happen in ash trees, similar to like a maple tree, where multiple sprouts come up from the ground in one location, or they end up splitting and forming two major trunks below where you would measure DBH, which again is at 4.5 feet. You end up having in the center here information on the lat and long. And once you select that, it should be able to use your phone's location to add that information. And then what you'll end up doing under that is add another entry, which in the center of the screen here means that you're going to add another tree. Ash photos is a different section as you scroll down within the app, and you'll take ash photos. It doesn't have, it will be uploaded. You do want to take photos of certain things. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen here under ash species, you click if you took a photo of the branches and the leaves and the bark. Once you click all of those, you can add other photo entries below, but we just need 3 of those pictures per plot so that we know that you've definitely found ash trees, and this is what they tend to look like. We also like some photos of the EAB symptoms. So here we have, for each of the following symptoms, take at least 1 photo. You have our D-shaped exit holes, your galleries under the bark, EAB larva present, flaking with woodpecker holes. It can be just woodpecker holes, but usually you might also see bark flaking along the side of a tree. I forgot to insert a picture of that here, but there should be one on the monitoring ash page. And then at the very bottom, as you can see in the right-handed picture, there's a spot for additional observations to be noted so that you can add in any other important information that you'll need to know for next time. Doesn't necessarily have to be about the trees. It could be about the plot in general. Like, for example, this spot floods until June 1st usually. And that would be a good note to have if you were having a floodplain plot. And of course, then you just hit save at the bottom and you're all set there. So you can see that there's multiple ways that we can use our mobile apps in order to take data and help us out with assessing ash trees, the damage that EAB causes over time, and our ability to find our more rare lingering ash trees that we do need in order to continue our EAB resistant tree breeding. I have the Great Lakes Basin Forest Health Collaborative webpage listed there, which is part of Holden Forest and Gardens website. Again, TreeSnap.org, monitoringash.org to help you with those two different apps. And of course, lots of information regarding emerald ash borer at emeraldashborer.info.